Okay, I would like to thank the organisers, Orc and Kalesh, for inviting me to talk. It's a great privilege to come to Cambridge and speak about my research. One caveat is that I'm not actually a modeler, and I'm an experimentalist. But what I would like to explain is how we're currently using stoichiometric models in our research. And by way of an introduction, I'll introduce the next speaker who's been working in my lab on a new approach. Our institute is a quantitative institute where we can basically quantify pretty much a lot of metabolites. We've got about over 100 mass specs set up for various configurations to measure various metabolites. And so basically, the main technology is CEMS. I'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow, but basically we can get the anions and the cations in a system. This is a typical output from the system, very quantitative. So this is our good standard set. We've got a good standard set which is made up fresh, and then which is about 500 or 600 metabolites, and about 3,000 metabolites in the monthly one, which is made up monthly. What my basic research is I use continuous culture to characterize yeast, brewer's yeast. In particular, I'm interested in when you grow brewer's yeast up, they don't reach the steady state often. If it's truly a prototroph, most of the time they go into a dynamic stable state, which usually is oscillatory. So we call it the yeast respiratory oscillation. And here's an example of actually just snapshots from 2 fermenter runs. I'll just quickly go through this. So basically this is days, and this is the amplitude of the oscillation of the dissolved oxygen. And we go from a state where we've got a reduced environment in the cell to an oxidative. I'll talk a little bit about that tomorrow. And basically you can see it's incredibly stable. I think my record's about 3.5 months for keeping the system in the same state and just analysing what's happening between the state changes that we see. Now, what is actually happening, a bit of a summary of the oscillation. The period, which is condition and strain dependent, ranges between 0.5 and 8 hours. Some people say 50 hours. I would probably tend to the 50 hours because we've got other yeast species which oscillate with 60 to 70 hours, so you can really extend the period. Synchronization is mediated by gases mainly. Acetaldehyde, which is a gas at 30 degrees, which is the temperature we use, is one of the main synchronization agents, and possibly carbon monoxide, but I'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. Amplitude is mostly mediated by other gases, which is hydrogen sulfide, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and ethanol. Ethanol's not a gas at a temperature, but it's got a high vapor pressure. And we've monitored everything else, and we can't find any other higher molecular weight compound which is actually communicating here. So it's not like a quorum sensing effect. It's very rapid as well. I study the 40-minute because it's easy to sample 3 or 4 cycles in a day. Okay, so the online measurements we've got on my system will be, of course, dissolved oxygen. We can measure hydrogen ion output. We can measure heat production, oxygen, CO2, and H2S. All these units are millimoles per hour, and of course, because it's a cyclical system, we can take the time out. So basically, we can go from 0 to pi and monitor everything with phase relationships, which means it's really easy to put experiments together from very diverse sources. So you can put experiments together from transcriptomes that were done years before the metabolome, put them together and actually come up with a coherent story about what they're doing. And one of the stories is tomorrow I'll talk about, which is a chromatin story. Cytometry, the cell division cycle, is synchronous. Actually, the S phase is synchronous. So you've got S phase production kind of throughout the cycle. It starts here and ends here. And there's something special about the sweet spot, which we'll talk tomorrow about. In the 40-minute period, the dry cell weight, the cell number, and the cell volume don't change. So it's quite good for modeling. The transcriptome, the entire transcriptome oscillates, so we'll just get that one out of the way first. Of course, you can cluster this. So this is you've got to use kind of like a multi-dimensional 3D clustering to analyze the gene data. And then from these you can produce, you can't really see it very clearly, but we've got these clusters which I'll talk a bit about tomorrow. We've got these clusters which have a functional program which we plan to actually put into our modeling approach to actually guide the FBA, which will be talked about later. So basically we go from cytoplasmic ribosomes, two groups of anabolic genes. This one's particularly to do with methionine and protein biosynthesis. This one is mostly to do with amino acid biosynthesis. Then we've got mitochondrial ribosomes in a cell cycle cluster. And then we go from, then we've got two catabolic clusters. So we're going from anabolism, the transcriptome is going from ribosomal anabolic mode to a mitochondrial catabolic mode. So it's switching between these two. The metabolome, of course, we did some nice research. This is the good calibration standard. So there's about 350 yeast metabolites in here, and this is quantified. So we can quantify in attomoles per cell or whatever we measure. Now, this catabolic and anabolic switch appears to be mediated by ATP, obviously. You've got ATP-ADP ratio going from 2 to about 5. And at this time, you've got a complete switch in gene transcription. So this peak and this peak are switching for catabolism and anabolism. Okay, so the energy charge also mirrors this, and I'll talk a little bit more of this graph tomorrow, but it's just to see that this is an energetic event. You're going from a low energy stress type state, which fires the catabolic genes on, to a high energy growth state, which causes the biosynthesis of macromolecules. So I'm approaching this with using a 13C metabolic flux analysis currently. It's a project very much ongoing. I'll explain what we did. For those of you not au fait with 13C metabolic flux analysis, you put in a mixture of isotopes of glucose, and then the cell takes it up, and then you measure the isotopologues or coumamoles of the system, which is basically represented by these three metabolites. From that ratio, you can then, I've got a summary here. From that ratio, you can then pump that into a stoichiometric model with carbon atom transitions, which isn't that trivial, because there's often a lot of errors in the databases. It's common in every system. So basically, we developed a piece of software which should be ready for submission and out soon, called SBML Cartographer, where basically we take any SBL model, which has to be annotated with Chebby IDs. Then we run the biopsych API on that to get the atom transitions. Then we can flag dubious and unknown mappings, and we output a standard called Flux ML, which is 13C MFA ML, and this seems to be working quite successfully, although we need to look at the network a bit more. And what was really neat about it is we can put the metabolites we can measure out of it and make a network from the bigger model. So we're currently using the Manchester model, putting what we can measure in, and then it'll output something approximating to what it thinks is okay. So this was in conjunction with Glasgow University that I did this, and because I'm not made of money, we can't really do the classical pseudo-steady state isotopically saturated. Well, the dynamic isotopically saturated it would be, because that requires a lot of glucose. So we really just concentrate on a very dynamic system where we've got a dynamic isotopically non-saturated system, which is one of the most difficult things to actually get any information out of with regard to flux, but with regard to metabolite turnovers, you get a lot of information. And I'll just go through the experiment. I'm running out of time on it. 5 minutes, okay. So just quickly go through this, the sampling regime. We took 84 samples, the blues where it's not hot, the reds where it's hot, and the greens the recovery. There's a small starvation phase here because there was a mistake in transferring the bottle over. The scale of the problem becomes apparent when we decided what we measured. We've got extracellular metabolites, we've got biomass composition, we've got polar metabolites, we've got non-polar metabolites, and we've also got gas phase. So each of these have a positive and a negative detector, and each of these have 84 samples. So it landed up being 840 mass specs that I had to process, which was a bit tedious. And this is the kind of data we've got from it. We've not got the fluxes yet because we're still producing the model and doing the simulations. So this is glucose 6-phosphate, and this just tests to see if the labeling worked correctly. So the baby blue line is the monoisotopic mass, and then you've got two-thirds of it is the first labeled one here, and the gold line is 6. So that's what we labeled with. It's about a third, two-thirds. And we're putting all this data together and trying to calculate fluxes. We can already see some complex dynamics occurring where the baby blue line's out of phase with the red line, indicating that this is the flux ratio. This is the ratio of isotopologues. So 1 would be completely labeled here, or the ratio of 1. And we can see that the baby blue line is sometimes out of phase with the red line, which means it's drawing sources from different places. So we're really just quantifying this at the moment. The TCA cycle, again, we can get all the TCA cycle. I'm just showing 4 to show a phenomenon which is coming out of the data, where the sort of biosynthetic arm, the fumarate and malate arm, is completely out of phase with the catabolic arm. So you've got this pumping in the TCA cycle, which is not really a cycle, but it's more of a switch in the system. We can also do a neat little trick with carbon dioxide. We've only got IR detectors. I can't afford a mass spec, but the spin state of 13 CO2 is half of the spin state of 12 CO2. So you can from this phenomenon you can calculate the labeling ratio of 13 CO2. And then there's some interesting dynamics with a big drop here, and then a gentle drop here, which would seem to indicate that CO2 is being either produced from glucose or being produced from the intrinsic biomass. Interestingly, the RQ goes below 1, which means it's taking up CO2, which we've got more mass specs on, and the yeast is taking up about 7% of the CO2 from the environment when it's growing in this phase here. So, the challenges for this are obviously the same as FBA in many respects. The yeast biomass definition is very dynamic. You've got to basically calculate it. If you don't, then you're just relying on old figures. For example, the DNA in the previous models that I've seen has been a diploid in G2. So you've got to calculate the exact ratios of G1, G2 and S phase in order to calculate the DNA. So we've got systems in place to do that. The definitions of biomass, glycogen, obviously it's the entire thing that encompasses the cell, but the macromolecular biomass can be split into a very dynamic one, or something which is not so dynamic, like DNA or RNA, which is fairly stable. So the dynamic ones are like glycogen and the free amino acid pools, and lipids in particular are a big problem. The model goes to a 1973 PhD thesis, and I'm not saying the science wasn't good in those days, but I'm sure it was great. But the lipids ratios that we're seeing and the lipid species that we're seeing are highly dynamic, and it's only a few specific ones. Data integration obviously is a big problem. The same issues that you guys have been talking about. Visualization is another big problem in this, the visualization of the data, and compartments, Keio, that's a mistake, that's a typo. Compartments are obviously another issue that you guys are dealing with. That's one thing why we started FBA, which is the next speaker, Sabrina, because hopefully with this approach, the 13C MFA, coupled with FBA, where we can actually see compartment dynamics, we can actually try to work out the communication between the mitochondria and the cytoplasm. And this is just an introduction to Sabrina, so she'll talk about this. This is just a schematic of what she does, which is basically a kind of dynamic FBA or a cyclic FBA. And I'll thank these people and stop. So Rainer in particular, he's done a lot of the bioinformatics on this. Sabrina's obviously here, Willie is in Germany. He's done a lot of the work in sampling. Kailash, who actually helped out a lot on this experiment. And Alistair Maxwell, who developed the SBML cartographer as a master's project. And Kaori Igarashi, who's a great technician who helps a lot with the MS. So I'll stop there, and that's that.
Thanks so much, questions? Okay, very impressive data set. Do you have any idea as to why the cells do the synchronization? What's the benefit of that, or is it?
What's the benefit? I don't know, but a lot of cultures do it. The benefit, we did think that it was to separate oxygen from DNA division, but that's just not holding true just now. So oxygen from DNA synthesis, it would be advantageous to have, you would think it would be advantageous to have it in S phase occurring out of phase with ROS production. But that doesn't seem to hold true anymore. The other thing is you might be able to run reactions more efficiently under one dynamic state from another state. So when there's a lot of ATP driving things, you don't really want a lot of NADH around, and vice versa. And both of these drive separate reaction networks. So you might just be temporarily separating in order for efficiency.
Any other questions?
Follow up on this, are these cycles observed also in, let's say, practical settings of beer making bioreactors or in nature? Do you know if there's...
Yeah, well, the colony acidification, which I think this is related to, is known. I study yeast because it doesn't smell bad, but other people do E. coli and Salus, and they oscillate quite happily as well. Once they start talking to each other, once the gases, I think gases are very important. The gasome, let's call it that, gasomics, gasomony.
All right.
So then if at a very low density, the gas concentration goes down, will the synchronization still be observed? Is this density dependent phenomenon?
Yes and no. It is because it's a signal, you receive a signal, and obviously that signal means the synchronization is occurring. But it depends on the strength of the signal. So for example, E. coli synchronize at very low cell densities, and you get a 15-16 hour oscillation from E. coli. Cancer cells are also very low cell density, and they synchronize with maybe about 50. And this is leukemia. I'm not saying all cancer cells do it, but some of the leukemia cell lines I worked with actually show a really nice synchrony as well, which is nice. But it's difficult. It's always difficult to tell whether it's happening inside the human body, because it's complicated there. But in nature, yeah, you see colony patterns everywhere, and I think it's kind of related somehow.
There are no more questions? Or Daniel?
Just one quick one. I'm curious, the detection of the fluxes, do you look at where the labeled carbon ends up just in amino acids like some groups do, or
No. We're looking at lipids, amino acids, nucleotides, not storage, not cell wall. But I guess we need to, because I've got these samples stored, and I need to just work through them and munch them up. But it's a lot of my specs, and I'm getting sick of looking at them.
All right, let's thank Dougie again.